Welcome, everyone. So my name is Nadine Baya. I'm the Academy Manager at A4S, and thank you so much for joining our webinar today on Lead the Way, Engaging the Board and Executive Management. Boards and executive management teams are under increasing pressure to approach the governance and management of sustainability in the same way as they would with any other business risk opportunity. By understanding the business case for change, finance professionals can inform, actively support, and challenge the board and executive management to bring sustainability onto the table and make it an integral part of decision-making. In today's session, we will hear practical insights from our speakers and explore the principles of engaging your board and the executive management on sustainability. Please note we are recording the webinar and it will be made available on the A4S YouTube channel afterwards. These A4S webinars are open to everyone. Please have a look at the follow-up resources email we will send out after this for all the upcoming webinars and share them with your peers and colleagues. This email also includes more information about the Academy program in case you're interested. We're very excited to announce that the intake for applications for the upcoming Academy has just been opened, so you're the very first one to hear these exciting news. In terms of the agenda for today, so we will start with a discussion with our panelists to explore practical examples of engaging the board and executive management on sustainability. This will then be followed with a Q&A from the audience, you. We will then have a brief introduction to the A4S Engaging the Board and Executive Management resources available to you, so you know what you're looking at once you receive the resource email afterwards. And we will finish with a wrap up. Throughout the webinar, you can ask questions freely in the chat function, and we will try to address these as part of the Q&A. We will also be asking you questions about the content covered throughout the webinar using Zoom polls, which you will be asked to complete in order to get your CPD or CPE points. After completing today's webinar, you will be able to describe the practical steps for engaging the board and executive management on sustainability, outline how to prepare for engaging the board through regular board activities and embed into regular decision-making, and translate the experience and learnings of others for practical examples shared during today's webinar to your own work. And with that, I'm very pleased to introduce you to today's guest speakers. So there is Philippe Joubert, founder and CEO of Earth on Board. Philippe is founder and CEO of the Earth on Board, an ecosystem of sustainability actors dedicated to informing and helping boards to put sustainability at the center of the company's strategy, achieving an Earth-competent board. He's advisor to several CEOs of leading global companies in the area of sustainability and international development, and a member of several boards in France, the UK, and Brazil. He's also trustee of Client Earth, senior advisor and special envoy energy and climate for WBCSD, member of the International Advisory Board of the World Energy Council, member of the Advisory Board of the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, and he has significant experience in transforming leadership around sustainability, including an acting as former president of Alstom Power and deputy CEO of Alstom Group. Welcome, Philippe. With us today is also Kevin Hutchinson, Vice President of Investment Finance and Valuations at OMERS. He leads the private investment valuation team with a focus on the infrastructure and private equity classes. OMERS is one of the largest defined benefit pension plans in Canada, serving as the steward and guardian of the retirement income of more than 500,000 employees from communities across the province of Ontario. Kevin was involved in the publication of our Essential Guide to Engaging the Board and Executive Management and our Essential Guide to Valuations and Climate Change. He has worked with the OMERS Sustainability Committee and Climate Risk Working Group to better integrate understanding of sustainability risks and opportunities into wider strategy and target setting. Welcome, Kevin. And last but not least, there's Ian Brimicombe, Senior Vice President of Group Finance at Burberry. For the last 4.5 years, Ian has been Senior Vice President of Group Finance at Burberry, a global luxury fashion brand. Ian's responsibilities include group financial and management reporting, specialist finance, finance systems and master data, finance transformation, and sustainability finance. His current portfolio from this calendar year includes more time dedicated to sustainability. Burberry was recognized as a climate leader in the ICAEW-backed 2021 Finance for the Future Awards for its extensive climate-related work. As part of the transformation required to achieve this award, Ian has been leading the finance team alongside the corporate responsibility team to embed sustainability within the organization, including strategic thinking, capital sourcing, and investment decision-making. The finance team has significantly increased its focus on sustainability during the last few years. Welcome again to all our speakers, and many thanks for joining us today and being part of our panel discussion, which will be hosted by Helen Wayne, A4S's Senior Manager of Accounting and Sustainability. So without further ado, we move on to the next part, the panel discussions, and I hand over to you, Helen.
Thank you very much, Nadine, and thanks again to our speakers for joining us today, and we'll be sharing their insights. So Philippe, if we could start with you with the panel discussion. With the evolving landscape of sustainability risks such as climate change, global pandemics, it's really clear that the business case for a shift towards resilient business models is becoming stronger. You sit on the boards of a lot of corporates and are engaged with a wide spectrum of organizations. Have you seen a shift when kind of interacting with boards and an increase in the attention that they're giving to sustainability? And if so, what do you think are the kind of key drivers behind that shift?
Good afternoon, morning, everybody. Yes, thank you for. I think what I have noticed for the last 2 years is certainly a different awareness of the importance of the issue at the board level for very simple reason. They are seeing risk materializing. When I started this life of awareness with board, I had difficulty to find example. Now I have plenty of example of disruption in nature and systems, etc. And this is obvious. But also more positively, they are also seeing the opportunity materializing, and they are seeing immense shift in some area that were completely stable before. I come from the energy sector, and the entry of renewable, even nuclear now, because of sustainability or non-emission reason, is amazing. You also have mobility that went to electrical car when a few years ago it was not even in the agenda. So risk opportunity are materializing. But more importantly, and this is, let's say, the last year, I am seeing resources moving and changing their behavior. And board notice this because this is key to their business model. The finance start, and I don't want to judge what will be said after, but the finance world is changing and starting to move. And the human resources, the talents, are also changing the way they behave with the company. So all this is visible from the board. And surprise, surprise, all this is key to the board duties, because the duties of the board, which is taking care of the long-term interest of the company, are affected by this. The duty of care and diligence is completely changed because board cannot say they don't know. And this is the biggest change for the board duties. And the materialization of external communication is also changing. I am not entering into greenwashing. We will see that probably later in the conversation, but this is something that the board are aware of. So in a nutshell, their world is changing also.
Yeah, and it does seem to be a very rapid shift, especially over the kind of last few years with changing regulation and policy as well.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of kind of key interest areas, have you seen, obviously last year with COP26, there's a lot of focus on climate, but are there any other kind of particular areas within the remit of sustainability that board members really want to understand more about? And what what areas are they
Yeah.
kind of looking to understand better?
I think I will stay in the same line. I think the board are seeing the impact on their business model, and they want to understand. So they started with climate, but more importantly, I think water is sending a big wake up call now at the board level, because either because there is too much water in some places or not enough water. Anyway, this is affecting, for example, the supply chain. When I am sure that when you select a new supplier, in my time of CEO, I was used to ask for price, quality, and delivery time. And now we are asking the fourth question, which is, what is your resilience to climate change? Because this is important for us. And I think this is also probably the key word. The boards are really worried about the resilience of their business model. And they are starting to understand that this is changing, and they cannot escape to look in front of them what are the change moving. So I will probably say, and the pandemic, by the way, has brought an interesting wake-up call for the board also, because this, for the first time, they understood that profit was not an insurance for everything, because you have seen that because of the interruption of business in some countries where the government step in to help some business to survive the crisis, they didn't help the more profitable. They helped the more useful for society. So I think this was also a very interesting call to the importance of purpose. Are you really part of the new world that we are building and which is under constraints or not? And this is core to the board duties. The long-term interest and the purpose of the company has to be respected, and the dialogue with all the stakeholders also, that the board suddenly wake up and say, oh, this is not only with shareholders, is fundamental, is important, is whatever, everything you want. But this is not the only important thing to tackle when you are at the board level and when you want to respect sustainability.
Yeah, it's a really interesting mirror of COVID and the kind of impacts that might be taking place in a kind of different changing future. Yeah. The rapidity with which they occurred and the impact that they had on businesses was a real, interesting Absolutely. Time. So many of our audience are finance professionals who probably don't have direct links to their to their board, apart from maybe through the CFO. How would you say that they can kind of best contribute to wider board understanding of sustainability impacts?
Because I will say that I would love to be 30 years younger, because plenty of reasons, but one of them is that I started my career in finance, and I think finance is finally at the center of the move. When I saw the result of your panel just before, and I would love to discuss that later. What we are looking at now is a huge change in business model. Why? Because the business model that on which I have relied for years, and that we are still relying in most of the part of the economy, is we take nature for granted and unlimited. And this is change. We reach the planet boundaries. So this is moving completely the way we can evaluate performance, individual and collective. And who has the key? The finance guy, because he knows the number, he knows the true cost, he knows the true value, and he has the responsibility to be the bridge between the old world, where we took nature for granted, and the new world, where we are in scarce resources and zero impact. So if you look at what happened in the company now for the last 3 or 4 years, this was all around this. And this put the finance person at the center of the dialogue. I personally don't believe in a company that have not understood that the chief sustainability officer should be the finance officer and nothing else, nobody else, because this is so important for the future performance of the company and the viability of the move. If not, we're going to continue to call the transition a cost and not an investment. We're going to continue to evolve to evaluate the performance on all criteria and not on new criteria. So this is key area now for the transition. And it is a fabulous place to be at this moment, because you will be not only the leader, but the trigger of the change.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, and that's exactly how we see it at OMERS, is that finance is kind of very critical to facilitating change and being very central to that kind of movement.
And don't forget that I said that I needed to be 20 years younger at least. But that's...
And just for a final kind of question, in your view and your experience of working with a wide array of organizations, what would you say are kind of the key indicators of an engaged board?
I would say for me, it's quite center of what I am doing at the moment. I'm going from board to board and CEO to CEO to try to explain and elaborate what is what I call a Earth competent board, which is a board that is really understanding the wide and the importance of the issues. And basically it's around 2 or 3 criteria. The first one is that they have to understand the issue. They have to be proficient in sustainability. And there is no miracle. They have to train themselves, that they have to understand better the issues, etc., etc. Second, they have to have the right organization. I'm not talking about committee or these things, which is important, but not only. They need to have the skills. And not only one skill. It's not enough to hire the last Nobel Prize in sustainability. You need to have your members understanding this. This should be part of the way they make decisions, they discuss, they exchange, and this is a really important training they must receive. The third one, and they need to spend time on this. So when I arrive at the board, I ask the agenda of the last 2 years, and I look at where they spend their time. So a board that tells me that he put sustainability at the center of the agenda and spend 1% of his time on sustainability and 50% of the time in discussing the bonus of the CEO has no credibility. And so they have to understand that spending time on the issue is really key. And lastly, has to understand that the board has some duties, as I said on the first question, and one of them is to guide and to challenge the management, not to be a chamber of registration of decision already taken by the CEO, but they have to challenge them, to guide them, and to ask the right question. We don't have time to go into detail, but this is a really important instrument and a proof that the board are sincere and have understood that they have the duty. I always say, business has to change. Business is the key if we want to solve the issue that we have created, but this change has to start at the board level. The board should lead the way of the change.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really interesting comments, and I wish we did have time to talk about everything. Maybe we'll save it for another webinar.
Another time, yes, absolutely.
And Ian, just touching on kind of Philippe's point around how the finance function is so critical to kind of this drive and change towards a more sustainable organizations. At Burberry, your work with Burberry has kind of driven significant change within the finance function and transformed over the last few years to a function that now has kind of sustainability built into its culture and strategic thinking. What would you say are the critical success factors with engaging with the board, and why do you see board engagement as critical?
Thanks, Helen, and good morning, good afternoon to everybody who's tuned in, and thanks to Philippe for those comments. As he was talking, I was just trying to check off whether or not we were living up to his high standards, and I think we did reasonably well, but I can explain a little bit of the critical success factors in engaging with the board. I think it is that awareness and understanding. The boards traditionally, of course, have been very focused on commercial strategy, what profits do they generate, what cash flows do they generate, and how can they grow the company and improve on the share price, et cetera, and those sort of traditional standards of measurement have been the preoccupation of boards for many years, and most of mine and Philippe's careers, I suspect, were in the same bracket in terms of wanting to be 30 years younger. But now I think we've had the opportunity to step into the board and talk in terms of sustainable value. And there's been some pressures on the board, of course, from external sources, from investors who are now, as we'll hear a little bit later, no doubt, are looking for those sustainability credentials in operation in companies at the board level. And that sort of set the tone for a different conversation going at the board. So we've now got to a position where we are driving conversations about value, sustainable value, through the activities of preserving, conserving nature, water, looking for ways in terms of reducing our carbon footprint, our Scope 3 emissions. These now are integrated to our board discussions, supported by the organisation as a whole. So I think that is critical to get that conversation going, get that recognition and awareness. We can't all have climate scientists on our board, and indeed we don't, but they are smart, assiduous people looking for that extra dimension. And they can see, of course, that if we don't pursue the path of sustainable growth, then we won't survive. So that conversation has shifted, and I think that engagement has been critical to get the company moving in the right direction. I think the other thing I would say on engagement is we started to talk about it in a risk framework, risks on climate change, etc., the impact that it would have on us and how we would mitigate against those risks. But then as the conversation went on, we started to build in the ideas of opportunity, the ideas of shifting consumer preferences and the commercial opportunities that would present if we could take a lead on those things. So that shift as well has engaged the board effectively. And now we have a sort of full governance program driving sustainable thinking in our organization led from the top. So those are two critical things I think have gone into that conversation.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, that discussion around opportunity and kind of not realizing it's just a downside, but an investment for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think once the board have seized of the agenda that Philippe has outlined, then of course it's their obligation to push it down to the organisation to ensure that everyone else's decision making is taking into account the sustainable angles, because they'll want to see performance measured in sustainability terms as well as commercial terms and financial terms. And that is done by a number of things. We can, as we're approaching now the new financial year, we will have a set of sustainability KPIs that are embedded into the organisation with individual accountability. And then we have a reporting process, not in 5 years' time or 10 years' time when we set our sort of climate ambitions, but year on year. So demonstrate that we are making progress towards Scope 3 emission reductions, for example. So
that's really interesting. Sorry, carry on.
No, go ahead, Helen. Go ahead.
No, really interesting point. I was just going to ask kind of any key policies or processes that you brought into play to kind of ensure commitment and drive across the board, that those KPIs kind of at individual targets seems to be kind of one of the methodologies that you use to drive sustainability. Absolutely right. I think it is. You make it like a budget process almost. You know, the budget process traditionally, again, commercial, financial outcome, sign off, everybody goes and executes, and we report as we go. We just need to do the same thing for sustainability. We need to have annual targets, accountabilities, and a reporting mechanism that sits with equal weight against the sort of commercial and financial assessment we make as a company on our budget process and forecasting processes. So that's what we're endeavouring to do. So they sit side by side, and indeed they're integrated. So when supply chain want to source differently, they're thinking about the sustainability dimension as they make that decision, as well as the cost dimension, for example. So those are equally weighted in the decision making. And once you've pushed that incentive down by reference to your budget process, and you've really got some traction on the agenda. And I think the other thing we're doing is, as Philippe mentioned, you know, who's the boss of sustainability? It does happen to be Julie Brown, our CFO, and actually Chief Operating Officer as well. So we have the sort of right governance structure there, but the incentives are aligned as well. So the executive have incentives aligned to sustainability, and we're exploring, and I'm insistent that we're about to introduce sustainability dimension to everyone's performance measurement for a year-on-year basis. So that alignment is also pretty critical to get the engagement, not only at the board level, but all the way through the organisation. Brilliant. And from the other side of things, so we kind of spoke a little bit about how potentially finance teams may kind of incentivize or drive awareness at board level, but from the other side, when boards kind of push down decisions or want to transition to a more sustainable business, what would you say the role of financing kind of facilitating that is?
Yeah, so well finance, as Philippe said, the bridge really. So we do run the budget process, the forecast process, the reporting process, the management accounts, etc. So we have the framework to build in the sustainability measurement. We have the capabilities of organizing that sort of KPI setting, measurement and reporting process. And of course, we need the help of experts in our corporate responsibility team, where we're very fortunate to have a large team there led by Pam Batty, who are all experts in their individual fields in sustainability, and they can help us and the organization build the relevant KPIs that are going to make the biggest difference, for example, to Scope 3 emission reductions. So it takes the roadmap and builds business relatable ambitions and targets. So that's pretty critical. And I think the board have also been insistent to embed the thinking more broadly. So for example, we've been refinancing Burberry recently, and certainly through the COVID crisis, we went out and issued a bond in September 20, and Julie and the board supported the idea that this would be sustainability-based bond, i.e. the use of proceeds would be in eligible investments for sustainability purposes. And the board, again, sanctioned the renegotiation of our bank loan facility and introduced a couple of KPIs there, which are sustainability related, including the progress we make on carbon reduction. So you can see the board is taking decisions with sustainability built in. The final example I would offer, which is an important part of our climate roadmap, climate net positive roadmap by 2040, will be the regeneration projects we enter into to do the sort of final offsetting of the residual carbon emissions. And the board, again, has been integral in sanctioning the investments we're going to make on regeneration projects and carbon capture projects, etc. So this is how the board has been influencing the organisation, and finance has been sort of bridging, to use Philippe's phrase there, which I think is spot on, to ensure the organisation responds to the board's wishes.
Perfect. And it sounds like the board is very engaged and kind of very driven to work towards a more sustainable kind of future. But have you faced any challenges with kind of either engaging the board or kind of acting as that interface and kind of making sure communications work kind of both ways?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges, of course, that we all face is, Philippe referenced to this as well, is data and understanding. So when we looked at the impacts of climate change on our business, it's quite a daunting task when you don't have the sort of climate change expertise in-house, and you're trying to build a model of impact on the organisation such that you can identify the risks, then identify the mitigating actions and or opportunities to pursue. So what we've done as sanctioned by the board is try and, particularly this year, to reappraise our approach under the TCFD framework to look at the scenario analysis of climate change. So building a model, and we had to enlist the help, very great help it was, from the Cambridge Centre for Risk Studies, who helped us build a digital twin of Burberry. And we imposed against that twin various climate change scenarios that led to a series of understanding of transition risks and physical risks, such that we could then take action to mitigate against. And so the biggest challenge is having all that scientific understanding and knowledge and data, put it through a process, a rigorous process, to drive out risks and opportunities, and then take actions against them. And all this has been done under the auspices of the audit committee, whose job it is to understand the risk, and then up to the board, whose job it is to sanction the actions and investment to counter that. So big challenge, but I think companies have to grasp in order to be able to really make a difference and set themselves on the right path to change.
Yeah, agreed. It does seem to be quite different sets of data that we're dealing with now, much more kind of future and uncertain data than the historic and kind of robust reporting that we might be used to in the finance profession.
Exactly, and it's taken all parts of the organisation to come together to try and understand the implications, because the business understands what it does and how it might be impacted, and the climate scientists have to bring, in the climate change arena, have to bring forward the potential changes that might impact the business. And for us, it could be raw materials, it could be the location of our stores, it could be the location of our hubs for distribution of materials and products. We have to look at all of that, and then bring all of that together, and then produce an action plan which protects us and actually puts us in a position of adding sustainable value for the future, and that's what that process is about. But it's required a whole step change and shift in approach, a different framework of understanding and data collection to put yourself in that position. And it's hard work, you know, but we have to do it. As Philippe said, we have limited resources, and the human condition is just finding that out right now. So we have to make a shift.
Yeah, agreed. And it's a really interesting exercise you've gone through to kind of really pull together different areas of the business. One that's definitely kind of essential, I think, to understanding the scope of the challenges that we might face. Thank you very much. And we'll just move on to Kevin. But before we do, just a reminder for everybody, if you have any questions for our panelists, do drop them into the chat box and we'll address them as part of the Q&A after the panel discussion. So Kevin, there are many things that impact upon business value, such as physical climate impacts, reputational costs from failures to kind of address inequality, or failure to invest in organisations with a clear sustainability strategy that might be kind of prepared for an uncertain future. In your role at OMERS, you regularly consider the impact of risks and opportunities on your business and portfolio. At A4S, we strongly advocate for kind of bringing sustainability considerations into valuation methodologies, but there can be hesitations from board members when trying to integrate kind of sustainability value into business decisions or business decision making. When having discussions with your board around this topic, have you seen a kind of shift in engagement around the desire and the need to bring in sustainability to portfolio valuations and investment decisions?
Thanks for the question, Helen, and pleasure to be here today, and good morning and good afternoon to everyone that's logged in. As a jointly sponsored defined benefit plan with a mandate to ensure the security of retirement income for more than 500,000 members in the province of Ontario, sustainability really has been at the heart of OMERS' organizational strategy. And last check, our youngest member was 15 years old and our oldest was 108. So this gives you an appreciation for the long-term horizon we adopt when thinking about sustainability. And in fact, we have a saying at OMERS, a quarter is not measured by 3 months, but rather 25 years. So that gives you a feel for the long-term horizon that we think about at OMERS. So with this backdrop, although sustainability has been an integral part of the OMERS DNA for many, many years, I'd absolutely say that more recently there's been greater emphasis and discussion around environmental, social, and governance factors, commonly referred to as the ESG factors, really in the context of investment decisions as well as portfolio valuations. And this has happened at both the executive management and board level. So from an investment perspective, we've got investments across 25 different countries with investment teams on 4 continents. So clearly having a defined approach to sustainable investing is really, really important. And to address this, we established a board-approved sustainability investing policy. And this policy really set out 4 overarching strategies for us at OMERS. The first was integration of ESG factors into investment decision-making processes and asset management practices. So we've got much better at these processes and developed tools such as checklists and dashboards to assist. But ultimately today we're more standardized and deliberate in our approach when it comes to ESG. The second is engagement, and this is engagement with our portfolio companies in a more meaningful and focused way to promote sustainable business practices. Whether this be how we vote our public shares or through the work we do as we sit on boards of our private investments. The third pillar is around collaboration, and this speaks to collaboration with like-minded institutions to exchange information, learn from each other, and really advocate for better transparency. And this includes all the work we do with organizations like yourselves at A4S, or even the Investor Leadership Network, which is now co-chaired by our CEO, Hutchinson. And finally, the fourth pillar is adaptation, and that's really around continually advancing our capabilities and practices to deepen our knowledge of sustainable investing, obviously with the end goal of our member interest in mind. Just a bit closer, I guess, to home in my valuation role with OMERS, there definitely has been an increased focus there as well to understand the implications of ESG factors on portfolio valuations, and with that, the stability of long-term returns. And I'd say the particular focus of recent has been the impact of climate change, and the entire transition to a low carbon economy really has been the topic of much conversation. And in fact, our board members and executive management team have participated in in-depth education sessions on climate change to really try to better understand the implications on the organization and investment portfolios. And frankly, this keen focus really drove to my excitement in participating in the Essential Guide to Valuations and Climate Change that was launched by A4S back in 2021. So in summary, lots and lots of engagement with the board on the topic of sustainability.
I was going to ask kind of the key, you mentioned climate change, but are there other wider sustainability factors that you see of the board being kind of either engaged with now or kind of as an awareness that this might be kind of an issue that needs to be addressed in the same way that kind of climate change is being much more brought into kind of factors, valuation factors?
Yeah, so I'd say, aside from activities around just the establishment of the sustainable investing policy and the implications that has on investment decisions and asset management practices, the real primary focus at OMERS for the executive management team and board has been around the establishment of some sustainability targets. And this again is related to climate change, obviously. And this was led by our OMERS Sustainable Investing Committee, working in collaboration with several business partners across the organization. So this included the likes of the finance team, as you've heard from both Philippe and Ian being sort of that bridge. And we went out and completed a comprehensive total portfolio carbon footprint study in late 2020. And that started to look at our portfolio holdings really for the first time through the lens of climate change. And those results then enabled both the executive team and board to better understand the organization's starting point as we started to chart a sustainability path for the future. And ultimately in early 2021, in conjunction with our 2020 annual report, OMERS was able to announce a target to actually reduce the carbon intensity of its portfolio by 20% over the next 5 years. So you can start to see how we were setting the foundation for target setting, and we started to build even on the short-term target, and underpin that with a net zero roadmap. And more recently, in November of 2021, we announced a longer-term commitment to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions across the portfolio by 2020. So as you can tell, the board's been really engaged in the process of understanding the footprint and starting to set measurable and ambitious sustainability goals, and that permeates through the entire organization. And again, from where I sit, we obviously support sort of the annual carbon footprint exercise across the portfolio, simply because valuations end up being a key driver of some of those calculations when you think about weighted average intensities. Things like enterprise values of our portfolio companies become important to those calculations. And then we're also really involved in undertaking what I'd call portfolio impact analyses. So this sort of starts to assess the impact when you think about new acquisitions or dispositions of investee companies. What kind of impact are they having on the sustainability metrics that we're setting for ourselves?
Thank you. Yeah, it's a lot of work and a lot of kind of data and processing to understand everything that's going on kind of in portfolios. And what processes do you have in place to ensure that the work that kind of you're doing to integrate sustainability considerations into valuations is being considered at board level and is incorporated into kind of wider decision making? Yes,
as mentioned previously, sustainability considerations are an integral part of the valuation process. Whether that is, the impact on risk when you think about things like discount rates or valuation multiple assessments, or whether you're considering them explicitly in a cash flow profile that underpins the valuation of a portfolio investment. And of course, preparing any sort of valuation estimate often involves significant levels of professional judgment on some of those key assumptions. And when you think about things like climate change, that just further adds and exacerbates sort of the complexity. And this is where the board and executive management really start to get interested and lean in. And some recent examples that come to mind would be things like how does the electrification of vehicles, for example, impact exposures to sectors such as transportation or even utilities? Or how does the transition to a low carbon economy impact the outlook for a fossil fuel pipeline, for example? So you're starting to get a feel for the types of questions that are coming from the board and management teams now around these types of issues. So we have processes in place. We track the evolution of these risks. So we identify them upfront, and then we track how they evolve over time, as well as trying to get an understanding as to how are these being priced in the marketplace to ensure that we're appropriately reflecting that in our valuations. And that obviously is quite challenging, and lots of work being done in that space right now, really to understand how are risks like climate change being priced, and to what extent is that being reflected in market valuations today. So then we would document all of these significant areas of judgment and make sure they're really apparent in our materials up to the board and executive management team. So when we're having these types of discussions, it's really clear where we're making some of the judgments and where those significant assumptions do reside. And then if I think of sort of a transactional context and the decision making there, it's quite similar in terms of making sure that the appropriate due diligence is being done on the sustainability factors and ESG considerations, and that they're really being brought forward to the likes of the investment committee when they're trying to approve transactions. So this includes standardization of ESG checklists that we're requiring in all of our deal pursuits, and then all the accompanying discussion on key ESG risk and mitigants. So this is all now really built in a very robust way into our decision-making processes.
It's really interesting, and the comments on the kind of interconnectivity of risks and how there's so many kind of different exacerbating factors. It really is an area that's just kind of everybody's just getting to grips with, really, it seems.
Yeah.
So reporting is a really kind of key area in terms of understanding sustainability throughout the organization. Strong reporting that's credible and data with tight controls is a key tool that boards need to kind of strengthen their ability to make decisions which incorporate sustainability. How do you make sure that the data that you work with and present to the board is robust and accurate?
I think as the old adage goes, garbage in, garbage out. So it goes without saying that it's imperative that data used to underpin decision making is reliable, it's accurate, and it's robust. So we've invested a significant amount of time and resources to ensure the integrity of the data that we're using to support these types of business decisions, whether that be from a sustainable investing lens or simply otherwise. So, for example, as we undertook the carbon footprint analysis, we did end up engaging experienced third-party consulting firm to help with that in terms of collecting the data, estimating emissions data where it wasn't available, and made sure that was all being done in a manner that was consistent with market best practice at the time. So this really starts to form a credible foundation upon which sustainability targets could actually be established. But we didn't actually stop there. We then further engaged an independent third-party accounting firm to start to provide assurance on the carbon footprint metrics. And this really started to set a baseline for our reduction ambitions and targets that we set. So this starts to demonstrate the robustness of the processes and controls around data integrity that's really necessary to support these types of decision-making exercises at both the board level, and also just garner credibility across stakeholder groups when it comes to speaking to these issues on sustainability. And I think you can draw parallels to that. Really, it's no different than when you're sort of in a deal scenario and you're conducting financial or commercial due diligence. We undertake very similar processes to ensuring that the data supporting the financial performance or commercial attractiveness of a target is accurate, reliable, and at the end of the day, really supportive of an investment decision.
Yeah, and I'm sure we're going to see a lot more kind of development as well towards wider assurance levels over kind of the data that we're using to look at sustainability. Thank you so much for your comments and for the panel discussion today. So Ian, I have one for you, if you wouldn't mind answering. Have you had any challenges measuring sustainability impacts and formulating KPIs?
Yes, plenty. I think we thought the hard bit was done by sort of baselining our carbon footprint and scope 3 emissions, and the corporate responsibility team did a great job of looking at how we were going to track from today through to 2040 to be climate positive, and drew a map of the big components of carbon emissions that would have to disappear over time in order to achieve that goal. And then we sat back and said, okay, that's great, but then how do you relate that to what we actually do in the business, and how do we allocate responsibilities for the individual actions that must be taken in order to realize that roadmap that we set out? And that's a difficult bit, so that we've had a go at looking at KPIs and specific targets for sort of a year-on-year assessment. And we've got a sort of start of a draft, if you like, agreed between corporate responsibility and the finance team, and indeed Julia, the CFO. But it's about then taking it to the wider business and engaging with them to make sure that they can understand the targets, they can relate to them, and then they can take real action against them. So that translation has to take place between the big picture, carbon reduction by 2040, 2050, whatever it might be, and then the actions you're going to take in the business, and then drilling it down into the organization, into sort of year-on-year activities that you can measure and make a difference. So that bit is ongoing, I would say. The challenge is difficult. So you take something like waste, and you try and figure out, okay, who is in control of waste in the organization? And of course, there are lots of components of it, but how do you then get a read across the accountabilities for managing that waste? And is it actually in the same organizational format that currently runs your business? So you might find different people have an influence over waste across the organization, whether it's, in our case, design or product development or supply chain. And you might want to bring together a different set of people than is traditional in the organization to solve for waste in a particular area. So the reorganization of the people and the teams and the steering groups and the working groups to drive a change in terms of dealing with waste is something we're going to have a pivot to. So it won't be your traditional regions and functions. There'll be some other set of people who are best able to influence the outcome. So working through all that is another challenge, as well as the data, the targets, and then getting the actions that are relatable to the business and the business teams that need to take ownership. So it's with this dimension of sustainability, it brings a whole pivot and shift of the organization to address it. So it is hard work, and start early is my advice to people.
Yeah, agreed. It's a really interesting framing it that way, that it does take a whole organizational shift to kind of respond to some of these challenges. So going on to the next question for anybody, if you use carbon pricing, how do you go about setting a carbon price to value the impact of carbon emissions on investments? Do you use external sources or internal valuations? So kind of using carbon pricing, and how practically do you kind of apply it or use it within kind of your organizations?
Maybe as the valuator on the call here, I can take a first crack. And to be honest, this is actually one of the key items on our agenda for the climate risk working committee this year. So we've started to really have some discussion around how do we think about carbon pricing. And to date, we haven't sort of overlaid any significant explicit adjustments for carbon pricing, but we're now having discussions in the marketplace to really understand how are others thinking about this. How is it being priced? What are our peers doing? So we hope in the near future we'll have sort of a clear consensus view as to how others are thinking about it, and then how do we want to apply that in the OMERS context. So I think it's a really relevant question, and one that we're actually doing our diligence on right now to figure out how do we want to incorporate that. And I'd say the second part there, just in terms of external sources or internal valuations. Clearly, if there's external opportunities to gain further insights into these pieces of information, that's always helpful when you take it back to the board. They'll be curious as to how others are thinking about it, what's standard market practice, and just making sure we're sort of not off in left field when we're thinking about some of these things internally.
Yeah, agreed. And there just seems to be lots of kind of sources for carbon pricing and carbon values. Sorry, and I just interrupted.
No, not at all, Helen. I was thinking one of the biggest risks we might face if the world is really pursuing 1.5 degree increase in line with the Paris Agreement is carbon taxes. So we've been trying to measure what that impact might look like under that particular scenario. So it's a transitional risk that would have to be realized by all polluters, I would say, and that probably has implications for most businesses. And then there's a question of what that cost might be. So you've got a range of external data points on carbon costs, and you can see companies actually picking different ones. But I think if they're transparent about the rate of cost of carbon, then I think at least you've got the ability to compare across companies. I don't know if Kevin has seen that yet, but we're sort of aware of what that might cost us under that scenario.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, Ian, in terms of scenario analysis. We ourselves internally have been running a bunch of different scenarios, and there is no consensus on necessarily some of these scenarios. It all depends on which source you go to and the data you can collect. But I think those are really a good way to come at sort of the potential outcomes. Is really starting to bookend around those degree scenarios, whether it's a 1.5 or a 2-degree scenario, and just really try to understand what the potential implications are in your investment companies or even the organizations such as at Burberry. So scenario analysis, I think, is a really helpful tool to start to wrap your head around the implications.
Philippe, I don't know if you had to comment on, and you've kind of recently been involved with quite a lot of work on net zero and what it means for the board.
Yes, exactly. Just to putting the board in the middle of this discussion of carbon price, because this is something which is regularly coming in the board discussion. And there is 2 things that we have to be very careful of. This is exactly a typical question that the board cannot ignore. A board should be waking up in the morning asking the finance people, what price of externality are you experiencing? I am not interested if it's the right price or if it's 100 or 90 or 95. I'm just saying that if a board approves investment intense carbon investment without having asked to the finance director, what shadow price have you used to present to me the return on this investment, is negligent, because he's building stranded asset. And one day somebody will call him and ask him, how can you approve this? At that time, it was obvious that the price of carbon was already existing and will not go down that easy. Before we do something very serious. So this is very important. This is not a discussion that should stop on the choice of the right price, but this discussion is about how serious are you about incorporating this new way, this new cost system in your decision-making process. And this is not about being right on the price. Unfortunately, we are all sometimes avoiding discussion, saying, oh no, we don't know the price, so we cannot use it. No, that's wrong. You have to use it. If not, you are approving stranded asset. And I have sold a lot of coal plant in my life, a huge number. And my customer, when I was discussing with this, unfortunately, they tended to avoid any system of carbon capture, for example, that could have helped them at the time, because it was a cost. And the big problem was this is not avoiding the discussion that you make the cost disappear.
I think that's a really good point. It's kind of there's lots of discussion about the right price, and it's something that I find a lot of challenge around. But it's it's a very good point to kind of just start with something, I suppose, and incorporate it into the business.
Yeah, I just think building it into the decision, the investment decision, is the critical thing.
Yeah.
So we've had a shift in the way we appraise our investment in stores, for example. So we have to appreciate and report to the board when that investment decision is made to what extent we are hitting environmental standards in relation to that investment. It's not a total capture and measure of the impact for sustainability purposes, but it's pretty all-encompassing in terms of the LEED and BREEAM standards, I should say. So it's a start to build that aspect, that dimension into investment decisions that really drives a different mindset in an organization. And I think if people can begin to do that, and if pricing can be standardized, so investments can be compared, then that's within an organization, then that's a step forward. But that's the mindset we need to drive, I think.
Well, thank you all for your comments today. I think we're running out of time, so I'll probably hand over to Nadine, although I'd keep talking about this for a long time. So thank you so much for our panelists today, and it's been a really interesting discussion. If you have any follow-up questions, then please do send them through to us.